Now I wanted to talk about some common 40-acre makeover pieces that we would install on a property and some potential problems on a property, and talk about the concepts. The concepts apply everywhere of good, sound deer habitat management, the concepts that we manage with, teach. Dylan's learned for many years on the job here and out in the field, and then Kevin and Joe do the same things. Wes will be doing the same thing later this year, towards the end of the year. But bottom line is, I wanted to show you some of these concepts or teaching, how you can take those to your property this year and transform your property just this year. You just see from a big picture view. You know, right now on a property like this, we have blue and water holes, red and bedding, green food sources. Look at these movement, these deer movements, the deer moving from plot to plot, bedding to plot, back and forth. It just becomes a big jumbled mess. It's random. People say, well, I can't get on and off my property without spooking deer. How do you do that? The more you define movement, where you know they are in the afternoon, where they're not at in the afternoon, where they're at in the morning, where they're not at in the morning, the more you can access appropriately. But when everything's random, you're gonna have an impossible time access. Now, if you're in Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, some of more of the Fantasyland states, then you can afford to push a few deer around because you can spook some and still shoot some nice bucks. They're not as hunter pressure wary. When you get into most states, especially the northern states, some of the southern states, eastern states, where you get a lot of hunting pressure, kind of look at it a big C for hunting pressure, north, east, south, then you actually have a severe problem if you make things random on your property. And it's no different than if you find this random mess out on public land. So you look at access. Access is hard. We got to change the access. Depth of cover, what does that mean? That means that all those food sources in the middle, right here, these two, this is a big food plot, like say on 40 acres, let's say this is 1.5 acres. This one's 2 acres down here. People say, well, I don't want to get rid of that food plot. But you have to, because it's right in the center of the property and it's pushing buck bedding away. Every food source, food plot, high quality food plot will push back buck bedding away the more powerful it is. The more powerful it is, the further it pushes that buck away. So a 10-acre plot will have a further effect into the woods where a mature buck doesn't want to bed next to that food. That's just the way it is. You see that, and I've seen that for many years. I wrote about that 15 years ago or more, where I started talking about layered bedding, where you see food, does, bucks, mature bucks after that, if there's enough room left over. When you have food in the middle of your property, you fragment it. So then it's just a bunch of doe movements, a random mess, and again, you don't know where deer are going to be on the property, so you need to convert this. This food plot needs to go to bedding. This food plot and water hole needs to go to bedding. That means these stands are associated with these black X's need to go away. This one's on the wrong side. This needs to be converted so that this entire area can be all deer all the time. Now you just lost a big food source. So I'll go to property like this, ag fields over here. They have a great bedding area that's early successional growth on this side with some shrubs, gray dogwood clusters, maybe a few conifers, maybe a few box elder or aspen or trees coming in. But they're just bedding here and going straight out to the ag. This is an access point for hunters to come in. This is access right here all the way up and down the road. They just wait till dark, go across the road, go to the ag. Instead, let's turn this into a food. And let's parallel the border, paralleling habitat features. Let's turn this all into just pure food in that bedding area. Now I have this really cool spot of food. That food source in there, it's running parallel to your borders. What does that mean? It means when deer come out, they hit this, they turn left or right, and they follow it. You can keep this cover right here. Now you're making a big area of all deer all the time, that encompasses from water hole to tree stand to food plot, bedding areas, making this giant area where it's all deer all the time. You're trying to fill in this area in the middle. Sorry to interrupt, but we have a lot going on with this food plot and many more. I can't wait to plant this. Check out what we're planting on WHS Wildlife Blends. All 12 of our blends are out. You can order bulk seed, buckwheat, and rye. Check it out. We have a new website. Click on seed on the whitetailhabitatsolutions.com. It'll take you right to the new blend site. Appreciate you for checking it out and taking the time to watch this. So what that does is, you already have bedding area down the corner, makes a strong movement to this food plot. Strong movements in between. Water holes. You want all this movement on the inside to be random. I mean, deer can go anywhere they want. That's a bedding area. All the way in there. You're not touching, you're not spooking them in any way. You're making heavy movements to food. You can create those lines of movement. You can create those food movements. When they come to the outside, you have paralleling habitat features. That means when they come in from outside, they hit your property, they turn left or right, they stay on your property longer, they don't run right through. When they're leaving your property from the inside to go out, because let's face it, 40 acres can't contain deer 24/7. They're moving to the outside, they hit that paralleling habitat feature, they turn left or right. Doesn't mean this needs to be a 10-foot wide food plot by 200 yards. It means that you might have a 4-to-1 ratio, a 5-to-1 ratio. It might be 500 feet by 150 feet, 200 feet, but it's appreciable. It's just not a big line running them right off the border right there. So what does that do for you? For one, you're tucking a large percentage of food over to one side, right here. Two, you have a couple small hunting plots towards the outside. I'd add stands on the outside then. Stands on the outside of them so you're not spooking the deer on the inside. So instead of accessing through the middle to a food plot, spooking out all deer within 150 yards depending on the wind and thinking, well, I'm safe when I get to my stand. Now you can control the wind better. So downwind, no deer is true. You know, you're sitting on a stand here blowing your scent to the outside. You're sitting on a stand here blowing your scent to the outside. Now in a case like this with a water hole and you're out the outside of bedding between food, now there's a reason for a buck to cruise there. Before, you didn't have bucks on the property because it's also fragmented and random. This turns into a morning bedding area waterhole stand. This is a morning cruising stand right here. Maybe these stands more in the middle. Put a stand down here. Those are more AM and PM stands. Maybe you have a stand on the back side of the bedding here, but you access it from here. You create travel corridors that go from food through bedding over to food. I hope you can start to see, I'm starting to make some big black lines right here. Those are all your movements for deer. They're towards the outside and you're staying out of this area for hunters. That becomes all deer all the time. That should be on any parcel. It should be contiguous, meaning it's all packed in together and it's at least 50% of the parcel. On a smaller parcel like 20 acres or 40 acres, you're probably going to be about that 50% line of this area encompassing that, because you still have to move around the property without spooking deer. You might have a 40-yard buffer. On the flip side, you can almost go right up against a road. I want to make sure that people driving by can't see into the food plot. But other than that, I want that parallel to the road that doesn't shoot them across the road real fast, getting hit by a car, and makes them think about it, slow down. They're turning left or right before they get to the road, instead of just running across in one spot all the time. If you put a water hole right there on the property line, you probably get a whole bunch of deer hit right there on the car because they're coming out, they're hitting the water hole, and they just run across the road, or they enter into that point really speedy to get over to the water hole from the ag side. Instead, make your movements parallel against that road. Now deer turn right, left, hit features. They're not forced across the road by running deer on a food plot, pushing deer, bucks chasing does, that kind of thing. Those parallel borders movements are great for hunter access because you're moving parallel to the border, and then you're perpendicular into a stand location, meaning you're exposing yourself very little to that movement left or right. But you don't have deer just coming in and out randomly. Like back here we had a water hole. Well, who knows where deer are going to come in and out right there. Now you make those lines of movements. Because you actually have bucks on the property, you can count on bucks cruising around the outside because they're scent checking this area on the inside where does are at. That's really important too. When it's just a random mess, why would a buck be out there cruising? They could be going in and out, left to right, anywhere. Now you're making lines of movement that actually make sense. Now you have, in a case like this, you have stands for morning and evening. The worst thing, we go to a property, Dylan was at a property the other day in Illinois where it's 70 acres, there's 2 stands, 2 rednecks, a couple food plots, or 2 food plots, 2 rednecks, and that was about it for stands for the whole property. Mostly evening stands. I mean, largely
at
evening
least in my opinion.
Yeah, because you walk in there, if there's deer there, you spook them out, they're not coming back to the food source. Greatest portion of a sanctuary is the food source. You spook that out, why are they going to be in your bedding area? So the client's having a hard time hunt that property because he has no morning stands and just 2 evening stands out of 70 acres. Typically we'd have, in a 70-acre parcel, you'd have at least 8 to 10 stands and maybe up to 14. I think, Dylan, you had 12?
I think we ended up with 12.
Yeah, that's a normal amount for that size property. Then you have that assemblage of afternoon and morning stands. Think about it. Let's say you have, in this case, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stands that can be used for morning. You also have a couple of those same stands, but 1, 2, 3, 4 stands that are 5 stands that are more afternoon. You have a couple that blend in between, but bottom line is you have about 10 stands, and you have a smattering of stands, quite a few stands, 50% that are more morning related for any wind. And then you have about half of those stands related more towards afternoon, evening, or a combination of both that can be used for any wind. So now you need that. You can't just have, on a typical 40-acre parcel, we'd have about 8 to 10 stands. And that means you're going to have stands for all winds, morning or evening. If you have 2 stands, like we see movements where it's just some pinch point where you have a stand here and a stand there. Everything's built to that right there. And you either have to have south or north, and you go in and sit. That's not a good wildlife plan or whitetail plan for your property. There's no strategy in that. You have to have defined morning, defined afternoon stands. The cool thing about morning stands, when you go in there in the dark, they shouldn't be here. You're coming well away from food. You're well away from the ag. The closer you get to those stands, the safer you are getting in and out without spooking deer. And then you sit with your scent blowing towards the outside where you know there's no deer. If you know there's a good trail coming on and off the parcel, then you plan accordingly with your stands around that edge. The bottom line is you have morning stands you can get into in the morning, and then you have the luxury of being there for 3 or 4 hours in the morning. You know where deer are at. We don't see them there, you get out. When you see them bedded, they've got up, fed a little bit, move on, you get out of the stand. You go in there in the afternoon, you're going in blind, you're undoubtedly going to spook deer because you don't know where they're at. In the morning, you've been sitting there. So that's why they're not afternoon stands, they're morning stands. And then the evening stands are pretty easy. You don't want to sit in those stands right on food or right close to food in the morning because deer are probably already there and you spook them out. And they don't come back in the evening. They don't even come back on your property. So I hope this makes sense. You turn a bunch of random mess into solid movements. When you have those solid defined movements for deer, then you have defined movements of deer that relate to morning and afternoon and give you multiple assemblage of stands where you can actually set up and plan for different winds. And then at the same time, it makes so you can count on those winds and you can count on accessing the property without spooking deer. When you have those defined morning and afternoon stands, when you put it all together, then you actually have a property that you can hunt, you can attract deer to, not spook those deer off, and it gives you the best of all worlds where you have defined core areas of deer you never spook. Unless you shoot a deer and it runs into that area, you go track it. The bottom line is now you have a stand assemblage, and those are some of the things we use, whether it's paralleling habitat features, depth of cover, where you want to make sure that you actually have a large portion of your cover that can hold bucks, doe family groups in this area next to the big food. Bucks as you get further towards the back, that's where you have those morning stands for morning cruising opportunities. Normally just hunt those stands in the rut, maybe opening day of gun season. So now not only do you have an assemblage of stands for morning, evening, afternoon, and all different kinds of winds, different access routes based on the wind. But you can also say does are bedding here, bucks are bedding here, and you give the deer what they want in your property so that you can build a herd and build a great hunt. And you know what? You can make this change, something like that. You can make that change right now because just a location of food that determines how deer travel on your property. Once you define how they're moving on your property in a definitive manner, now you can actually plan where to hunt, where to sit for morning, evening. It sets up the entire property, a definitive movement. Get rid of the randomness right now, and you're planning for this spring and summer, and you'll have a great hunt this fall, not beyond, but this fall. It only takes one planting season to change your hunt. And many parcels we see, say 95% of them, Dylan saw one where they're converting 200 acres of field into ag. That might take 2 years, but they'll at least have a great hunt, a better hunt this fall. It doesn't take long. It takes one planting season again to totally transform your property. And I encourage you to do so and let us know about it in our comments. I can't wait for you to have a great hunt this fall. Now, I don't know if you've checked out our main website lately, whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, but we've really had a lot going on, including hats, books, our web class, and certainly our new seed company, WHS Wildlife Blends. When you click on seed on our site, it'll take you right to our brand new site for the seed company. We have all 12 blends available. So check it all out though. I encourage you, I appreciate you checking it out. Whether you buy anything or not, really appreciate you visiting the site and seeing what's going on, and continue to watch because we have big things coming later this year.